what do these high-performing teams do that other teams do not? There are really 4 key areas of difference. And leaders and members of high-performing virtual teams lead differently, they build trust differently, and they communicate and make decisions differently. Virtual teams need someone who can both lead and manage. The leader articulates the team purpose and vision, and he or she inspires and communicates within the team and the stakeholders to maintain some motivation and ensure support. That's the role of the leader. The manager skills are used to provide clearly defined direction and clarity about how the work gets done. And highly centralized coordination usually works best in globally dispersed teams. Trust takes on a whole new meaning in virtual teams. In a geographically distributed team, trust is measured almost exclusively in terms of reliability. That is, do the team members do what they say that they'll do? Leaders of virtual teams need to concentrate on creating highly defined processes where the team members deliver specific results in a repeated sequence. And trust is earned through reliability is typically established after a couple, 2 or 3 cycles. The key to high-performing virtual teams is communication. The problem or the challenge becomes is that when we communicate virtually, we become less influential. The absence of visual communication removes the ability to read body language, which can often account for over 55% of the meaning behind the message. Virtual teams need to be more adept at using technology that engages team members and helps them to focus their attention on the tasks that lead to results. The leader and the team members need to communicate with each other more frequently and include both task-based conversation and relationship-based conversation. So they need to focus on both getting the tasks done, but also in building relationships. And one of the most difficult tasks for leaders of global teams is to recognize that their styles of decision-making can be deeply rooted in the cultures that they come from. Global teams need to be very explicit and provide explicit descriptions of how decisions are going to be made. Even domestic virtual teams need that. And the best virtual team leader is one who's willing to try out different kinds of decision-making processes at different points in a project. One of the most effective tools to assist virtual team leaders and members to establish practices for high performance is the team operating agreement. The team operating agreement provides the guidelines and the ground rules to help teams work together more productively. It can be formal or informal, but it has to consider the geographic, time, technology, and cultural differences that impact the effectiveness of how individuals and teams operate. The team operating agreement provides structure, process, and support so that the team members can concentrate on accomplishing their tasks, which lead to achieving the team's goals. The operating agreement has 5 major components: environment, team purpose and vision, team description, team membership, and team agreements. And while it might seem a bit overwhelming at first, the operating agreement simply organizes and brings to the surface ways in which the team members can best work together to accomplish their goals. I'd like to briefly walk you through the major components of the operating agreement so that you could actually create one for your team using the template that we provide. Our template makes developing an operating agreement easier because it's already embedded with the virtual team's best practices, and it can be customized to meet your team's unique needs. So let me start with the end in mind. Here's an example of what an operating agreement using our template looks like. Based on the information that you enter about your team, the output is a PDF document that can be stored on your team website or emailed to team members and stakeholders. I recommend that you discuss the operating agreement components and get input from your team members before you complete the online template so that you can include their input into the final document. And as a bonus for your participation in today's webinar, we're going to offer you free a 30-day access to this operating agreement template so that you can try it out for yourself. So stay with us till the end of the webinar, and we'll provide you the link so that you can get started right away. When you click on the link that will be provided, it brings you to a screen that looks like this. I'm providing you screenshots of the template today, but you'll have the live online form when you click on the link. The first component of the operating agreement is environment. Environment describes the organizational factors that are driving the need for your team. It may include why remote employees or a virtual team is the best option to meet your organization's needs. Answering this question connects the virtual team to your organization's strategy, and it begins to clarify why the team should exist. Identifying potential obstacles and then projecting resources the team will need enables you as leaders and as members to plan and prepare for challenges and any support you'll need to accomplish your goals. Here's a screenshot from the template of the environment component. It's a little bit hard to read, I know, from looking at the screen, but notice that there are text boxes for you to add in as much detail as you'd like. It's up to you. If you don't have time to complete the template in one setting, you'll be able to save your entries and then come back to it at a later time. So let me ask you this question. As you think about the virtual teams you're aware of, whether your own or others you're aware of, answer this question, and we'd like you to share your answers in the chat field. Why is a virtual team the best solution to address a problem or create an opportunity in your organization? So let's take a moment to hear your response to that question. Why is a virtual team the best solution to either address a problem or create an opportunity in your organization? And please type your responses into the chat field.
Okay, they're coming in pretty fast now. We have a response from Michelle. She believes it saves money for the company. Do you agree, Lee?
It can save money for the company. As I said, when these teams are well managed and well led, they can bring efficiencies, they can bring diversity of opinion, and they can be both a money saver as well as improve effectiveness of decisions.
Wonderful. Barbara mentions that you're able to hire the best no matter where they're located. That's a great one too.
It is, and recognizing that the best people can be located in many different places.
Perfect. A few more. Casa says you can meet often and regularly too when you're on a virtual team.
Yes, you can. And the key of that is, are those meetings effective? We'll talk more about that.
Definitely. I'm seeing a couple reduce overheads. Lori says that stakeholders are dispersed across the state. Travel budgets are not available to her, so that's a very cost-effective option too.
Yeah, definitely able to reduce travel costs and time, and that's important.
All right, thank you, everyone.
All right, what you're going to see here then is for many tasks, for many teams, we've talked about environment. For many teams, both on-site and virtual, members can get so caught up in the day-to-day tasks that they lose sight of why the team exists and what's the real essential meaning behind their work. Team purpose and vision provide members with the why behind the what of their tasks. Purpose describes the unique value that the team brings and who it serves. A purpose statement oftentimes begins with words such as, the purpose of this team is to so that. And when the blanks are filled in, team members have a clearer sense of direction and that there are others who count on them to deliver on their goals. A vision statement describes what the team wants to be and what the ultimate success looks and feels like. It's future-oriented, and it paints a picture of what the results will be when they're achieved. Vision statements should be brief and inspiring so that team members, one, can remember them and refer back to them when times get tough. Here's an example of one team's purpose and vision statements. You can see here on the purpose side, the purpose of this team is to develop a commercial underwriters training program that contributes to the profitable growth of the department. Program graduates will be able to pass a file review. So this is a very specific team purpose statement. The vision statement, very future oriented. We're a team that's setting a new industry standard for underwriter performance. Team purpose and vision are the center of any team's work, and with virtual teams, they're especially important to keep members focused. And the remaining three components of the operating agreement are all based on the team purpose and visions. Every team needs an identity. The team description provides the roadmap for who the team is, for how long the team will operate, and spells out key goals and milestones. So there are fields in the operating agreement that are built into the template so that you can enter your team's goals. And with those goals in mind, the specific skills needed by the team members in order to accomplish them becomes a lot clearer. The template is already seeded with skills that are typically required of most virtual teams, and you can customize these to include any unique skills that are required. Here's a screenshot from a PDF of one team's operating agreement. The components are highlighted in the blue fields, and the individual entries are highlighted in the white. So you can see here it includes the team name, the projected start and end dates, what are some team goals, and then what are the skills needed for this particular team in order to accomplish their goals. For newly forming virtual teams, the membership component provides a space to identify the team leader and member skills that are most important to the team and some that might need developing. Prioritizing these skills and then planning for their development can lead to just-in-time training so that the team members are ready when they're called upon to apply those necessary skills. The team summary organizes and individualizes team member information about their availability, about their skills, and about preferences they have relative to communication. It gives the team members an at-a-glance look at everybody on the team and how to best communicate with them. Here's an example of the entries in the team membership section of the operating agreement. Again, you can see team leader skills that are most important, team member skills, and then a summary. And it says that information is pulled from a table that summarizes the individual team member information. So it's entered into a table and then summarized in the final document. All right, here's your fourth challenge of the day. What are the two most important skills needed by your virtual team members? And you have an opportunity to select two checkboxes. What do you think are the two most important skills that are needed by your virtual team members?
All right, so responses are coming in a little slower as people are spending time thinking about this. I think these are really great options too, Lee. All right, I'll give everybody 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's look at some of these results now.
Well, interestingly enough is that the number one skill that you identified is virtual team communication. And as we've talked a little bit earlier about, communication is so important, particularly with teams where there is a high level of interdependence among the team members. In other words, the extent to which the work of one team member impacts the work of other team members. Right behind that is self-awareness and self-management. That's also important. Project management experience, interestingly enough, is identified by this group as something that's very important. And while that certainly is an important one, if we have in place good communication, if we have self-awareness and relationship management, and then technology that supports collaboration and communication, oftentimes the project management piece falls into place quite well. The high-performing virtual teams have this right balance of task-based communication, in other words, related to the project and accomplishing the task, but they also have a high level of relationship-based communication in which the team members genuinely appreciate and enjoy communicating with one another, where there's an openness to sharing information, and that they can rely on one another. So very helpful information. Let's go to the last piece, which is a great lead into this, and that is team agreements. Team agreements describes the agreements that members make as to what they value as a team, how they'll use technology to collaborate and communicate, how decisions get made, and ways in which they're going to address conflict. The operating agreement template is, again, already seeded with many best practices for each of these areas. You can simply select those that are most relevant to your team, and again, even add those that are unique. The stakeholder communications agreement provides an easy-to-enter format for identifying who the stakeholders are that are important to your team, and how to keep those folks informed of the team's progress, and how those stakeholders prefer to receive communication. So let me show you a couple examples of that. This screenshot shows the checkboxes related to meeting management. You can check whichever ones apply to your team and add your own customized information. Meeting management is often a big issue for virtual teams. And when those meetings aren't well managed, they can end up being an excuse for people to multitask instead of paying attention. And I bet all of us are guilty of that. Virtual meetings that are well managed and use the technology to capture and maintain members' engagement result in better input, better communication, and better decisions. Here's a screenshot of the decision-making portion of the operating agreement. And we've seeded it again with some of the best practices that allow you to choose the ones that are right for your team. And again, you can enter any that are unique in the text box. Developing an operating agreement not only opens up discussion about several critical work processes, it also enables team members to get to know one another, to collaborate, identify differences in perceptions, and build trust. And all of these characteristics are essential to high-performing virtual teams. Creating an operating agreement early in the team's development clarifies expectations and reduces conflict. And the operating agreement can also serve later as a checkpoint for those members who've been working together for a while. So periodically, you'll want to review that operating agreement and update it as needed. In addition, members can also refer to the operating agreement as questions and situations come up that could potentially derail their work. And this screenshot shows you where you can schedule reviews of your operating agreement so that you're all reminded of the checkpoints. Well, you've been listening to me talk about the virtues and benefits of an operating agreement. Better yet, I've invited my colleague Sue Drake to talk about her experience as a customer in using an operating agreement and what a difference that's made for her global virtual team.
Hello, everyone. It's very interesting for me to be on the guest speaker side of this particular presentation, since the Ascendis Learning Connection is really an extension of Drake Resources. But one reason why I think it's so important for me to be here is to say that all of our experts are tried and true tested by myself and my organization. We're the laboratory, and we experiment on some of these key items that our Ascendis experts are consultants with and experts at, so that I can come to you with real life situations and explain why I think they're so important. So here's one that's very specific to Lee's organization and what he created with the team operating agreement. So how would you like me to begin, Lee?
Well, talk a little bit, Sue, about your team and some of the things that you were experiencing. You've been a virtual team for quite a while, and so why would you even be interested in an operating agreement? And then once we spent some time talking about how that's relevant to your team, what difference did it make?
Those are very good questions. I've been in business 20 years being a virtual organization. So even when it wasn't the thing to do, we didn't have the four walls, we were virtual. And we learned how to communicate through email was the big deal way back then. My background, though, is business administration first and foremost, and then adult learning and performance support is really the passion that I have. So everything I do is always looking at the organization from the bigger picture. How is this business operating? How effective is it? How efficient is it? And I must say that, right away, I built in processes from the get-go. I believed in them. I used them personally, and I needed my team to work through things consistently. So we had put in place several processes with technology, with interviewing and recruiting, with marketing, with just all the various business acumen areas that a business needs. And I would say then personally, my style is to build trust very, very quickly. So I was able to kind of build that rapport amongst my team pretty quickly. Even though we were virtual, we didn't see each other, we had good camaraderie. Also, I believe in strong communication. So on a very regular basis, I was able to submit my vision, the purpose of our team, where I think we're going. I feel like I still do that quite well. And I believe in my people. So empowering them is just a natural for me to do. However, I knew we were still struggling a bit in communicating effectively with one another. And so as I was getting to know Lee and what he had to offer, I realized, okay, there's the clincher. That's where I need some additional assistance because I'm not figuring it out on my own. And so that if you think back on one of Lee's first slides where you're saying there's the foundational skills of a leader and then you have these additional virtual skills, I'd say where I was lacking was fostering the communication and then leveraging technology were the two areas that, of course, we were dealing with. I just wasn't dealing with them in the best way. So I'll tell you, this tool, the Team Operating Agreement, became just a great focal point for us. And Lee, if you don't mind, I'll just keep talking, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm kind of on a roll here. But when we learned about it, it was about the same time of year. So it's very fortuitous that all of you are on this call right now listening, because that's when I started to become more aware of what I was going to need to do for the following year. We're already starting to think about the next year, 2016. And it took me, 2-3 months to work with the Team Operating Agreement in its basic generic state and start to apply it to what I thought was more applicable to my organization. And then after I had completed it, from my perspective, I submitted it to my 2 directors, so those departmental managers, for their input. So that took a little bit of time, getting their input, restructuring, rephrasing things, so that by January, when I typically have a full team kickoff meeting to talk about what is this year going to look like for us based on what I'm seeing the market conditions are and where I think we're going to fit, we were ready then to bring in the whole team to review our Team Operating Agreement. Again, it was just an introduction, even in January, to what the 3 of us, myself and my 2 directors, thought would be most appropriate. And we gave each team member, and there's 10 of us total, time to review it and provide their written feedback back, also asking various questions. How might this work in their particular role or in a particular business acumen area? And so it took a little bit, and I'll just share that right up front. But it's worth it. It's worth the time. And I would say by about April of that year, which was about 3 years ago, we really had something locked in that we were going to play with for the rest of that year. And I'll tell you, even through the process of putting it together, caused a lot of enthusiasm, a lot more energy. Everybody was on board and putting things together. And it wasn't just how we're communicating with one another. I think one of the key items that I was missing was our preferences. When we're using technology, how many tools are there out there for us to use? We use them all, but many of us have preferences of which tools we'd like to use better, whether it's texting or Skyping, not just email and phone calls, but I mean, we use all of it. And some of us prefer a couple of those more than the other. We actually put that in the team operating agreement. What are our preferences? And we try to abide by that because, again, that's going to get the engagement from the team. So it's made a huge difference, I must say, in us pulling ourselves together. I feel that I can plan and not just trust the people, but trust that the processes are going to work. I don't worry about that anymore. And I now have my team from coast to coast, and I'm pulling in a web developer from the Philippines, so we're now global as well. If without the team operating agreement, I think we'd still be floundering a little bit. But every year we go back to it. For the last 2 years, we've gone back in January, taken a look at it, what differences have occurred within our team because of market conditions, or even our team members. We've had, a little bit of shifting of roles as well as new players. And what does that mean for the team operating agreement? It does not take long to update it. And I'll tell you, it's a really great tool for onboarding new team members as well. It gets them already established of how this team works. So I'm hoping that real-life experience resonates with all of you. It's just made a huge difference with my organization.
Sue, what your comments bring up a couple of thoughts. For a lot of us who found ourselves leading virtual teams, as you look at the research, this is one of those things where the practice sort of outpaced the research and best practices. People were told that, team that's virtual. Instead of having everybody in one space, you're going to have people in other states, maybe even other countries or other continents. And so people out there are doing the best that they could, the best that they know how. And what we have found is, as we've shared with you, there are some unique differences between leading virtual teams and leading co-located teams. And one of those is that absence of virtual communications. One of the questions that we received from participants as a part of the registration is, what are some of the best ways to build relationships and trust within a group that only sees each other once a year? And which sounds like somewhat similar to your group. And I would offer a couple of things. One of them is if you can only have one opportunity for your virtual team to meet face-to-face, make it the very first meeting. That's going to be your best opportunity to build relationships, to build trust, to define and discuss how we communicate and collaborate and work together, what's building alignment behind the team's purpose, and what the vision for the team is, and what people's roles are. If your team has already launched and you sense that members are not clear about those things, it can be done virtually as well. But that communication, and we have another question about that, how do you engage people when you don't have an opportunity to connect very often? How do you build relationships and trust with a group that only sees each other periodically? Regular communication with those team members is important, and regular can be regularly as a whole team or regularly in one-on-one conversations with those team members, again, depending on the level of interdependence among the team members' work. But it's important when you have those communications that it includes both task information as well as relationship conversation. So get to know a little bit about your team members outside of the work setting. And I see we have a question, so Lauren, I'm going to let you ask the question and we'll talk about that.
Perfect. All right, so the question that we just received is, how do you get someone's time quickly for a simple question when you can't walk down the hall or the time zones prevent you from calling them immediately?
Well, Sue, I don't know how you do it in your team, and I'm going to invite you to share that in a minute. But here's where an example of where the team operating agreement and the communication protocols come in really handy. And around that team communications, there is agreement around the team members. So for instance, if I'm going to send you an email and I need a quick response, I'm going to say at the top of that email, either in the subject line or in the very first line of the message, please respond within X number of hours, or respond within a certain period of time. One of the other agreements team members make is if I need a quick response from you and you aren't looking at your email all the time, then the next process we're going to use, or maybe it's the first process if it's a quick response, is I'm going to text you, or I'm going to send you a phone message. So think about, as a team, what are the ways that work best in order to get those quick, simple responses to those simple questions. And oftentimes people are able to respond quickly, in fact quicker to a text than they are to an email. Of course that depends on all of your team members having equal access to the same levels of technology. And particularly for global virtual teams, there are some differences. So this is a good example of the team members having a conversation about how we're going to work together so that we can respond quickly to simple questions and more thoughtfully to questions and issues that require more time and consideration.
And Lee, do you find that people are more open to getting their cell phones now as opposed to maybe 5 years ago?
I do, and the technology is such that it makes it easier for individuals to respond to those kinds of text messaging and voicemail messages.
Perfect.
And then one more question. I'm sorry, I was just going to chime in and just say what we do in our group, and that there are 3 modes of communication that we have determined amongst my team work well when we need to get a hold of somebody right away, and that would be just the first two that Lee had mentioned, a text or a quick voicemail. But we also use Skype chat, like an instant messenger type of thing. And so a few of us are at our computers on a regular basis. That tool will work well. It will just say, if you have a couple minutes, I have a question I need to run past you, and we can respond quickly. I'll be off the phone in just 15 minutes. I'll give you a call then. So we are working multitasking with these particular tools. If we text, the same type of thing. It'd be more of a question, though, where we want to ask, when is that individual going to be available so that we can give them a call. So we don't assume that they're available, and we don't dictate it. We are respectful enough to at least ask, when would be a good time for you for us to have a quick call? 5 minutes, and at least 2, give them a sense of how long the call is going to take. If you need to talk to them quickly, hopefully the length of time for the call or the connection is quick as well.
You know, Sue, you bring up another really important point that's key, I think, for virtual team members, and that is what I call make the implicit explicit. When we're working with members of our teams virtually, we need to be far more specific about our requests and about our information and communication. So as you say, if we're contacting a team member, be specific in terms of your availability, or what your needs are, or how decisions are going to be made, or who's doing what are the role clarifications, because those are things that in face-to-face communication, we're getting more of the information. But when we lack some of that face-to-face communication, it's too easy for us to either assume that the other person is clear about that, or we're not clear in how we communicate with others. So making the implicit explicit, I think, is really key.
And let's see, we have about one more question here. How do you keep in touch with each other on a more casual basis, basically making your team feel more alive?
Well, again, it's kind of one of those, it's what I call intentional casualness, if you will. And what I mean by that is find ways in which you're communicating with team members, as I said, to get to know one another on a relationship basis. For instance, if you're having a team meeting and it's one in which everyone is participating, take the first 10 minutes and invite people to share something that's not work-related about themselves. For instance, you can ask people, what's a success that you've had this week? What's something that happened to you outside of work that you're excited about? Tell me about something that is interesting or a food that you like. Those are ways to get to know our team members a little bit informally, and yet we know them as people. And when individuals feel that there is an interest and a sense that others want to know them as people, they're far more willing to trust. The other way to do that is through some regular one-on-one conversations. Particularly with team leaders, it's touching base with those team members regularly. And that depends on where those team members are located and how large the team is. But when team members know that they have regular opportunities to connect with their leader, that their questions will be answered, and that there's some time that will be available to them to share other concerns that they have, whether that's with their own work or with their team members, it builds those bonds and relationships. Most of the virtual team's work is done outside of team meetings. So encouraging team members to connect and communicate with one another outside of teams, again, particularly teams where there's a high level of interdependence among the work, is really important. So it's weaving in those relationships, that informal conversation within team meetings. One last thing I'll say about team meetings is if you think about in a face-to-face team meeting, before the meeting ever starts, there's some informal conversation and socialization that's going on. However, what I find oftentimes is that when a virtual team meeting begins, that teleconference or web conference, whatever that is, we go right to business. And there's no opportunity for some of that socialization that we've learned is really important to building trust among those team members.
So true. So do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I can again share some personal or very specific experiences on what we do. And as we mentioned, having one-on-ones. I have one-on-one weekly calls with my directors. They in turn have one-on-one calls with their team to keep just that regular connection, even if it's 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be long. And if we need to skip it for a week because of travel or some other scenario that popped up, then that's just fine. But at least we know it's on the calendar. And I do ask specifically what's going on in their life. As I mentioned earlier, that my style is very much relationship building, and for me, building trust is about holistically considering that team member as a person, that our personal life is impacting our professional life, and our professional life does impact our personal life. You can't separate them. They are integrated. And so whenever I talk with my folks, I usually ask 1 or 2 questions about how's it going. And then from that I'll find a parent has been ill, a child has been ill, gearing up for school. We just went through that these last few weeks and how crazy that is for parents with school-age children. We have several folks who are single, but their pets are very important to them. And I take that very seriously if they're having struggles. Or they've been traveling and asking them questions about that. One way that we get together then as a team is quarterly. The first Wednesday of each quarter tends to be our group gathering. And we usually have one question that everybody needs to be prepared for to answer to the whole team. So our June question was, so what's the highlight that you have planned for the summer? And some of them had plans and some didn't have plans at that point, but at least it started the conversation. And that's really what it is, the conversation starting question. It's been cool to watch then how some of those conversations continue on after our group calls, just in little bits and pieces in emails when someone on the team hears what someone else is handling or involved in. They'll follow up with that person. They might be having a similar situation. And so I think that starting the conversation in the group calls contributes to individuals building the rapport amongst themselves after the fact.
Exactly.